Oh hello, Dragonfly Swarm. So generally when a 5-star has an upcoming banner rerun, I make a video discussing whether they're worth pulling or not, but for Klee, I figured it would be a bit redundant to do so because the vast majority of players are either pulling for Kazuha, Yoimiya, or Sumeru stuff. Klee is on the absolute back burner. It's unfortunate but safe to say that Klee's rerun was placed very much out of her favor, but I did want to discuss one of her most unique and powerful synergies, that being her synergy with Kazuha. Kazuha is a character that synergizes with almost every unit in the game, but in the case of Klee, he not only synergizes with her, but he also solves a surprisingly large amount of her inherent issues as an older, more outdated character. So in this video, I'm going to discuss why I consider Kazuha and Klee to be a god duo of sorts, capable of elevating Klee's generally tedious playstyle into an enjoyable and respectably powerful one. Disclaimer though, this video is somewhat different than my usual god videos in which the duo synergy involves almost exclusively giant damage increases. So while yes, I will discuss all of the ways Kazuha directly improves Klee's damage, I will also discuss the equally impressive practicality that Kazuha provides to Klee, which does not always come in the form of direct damage increases. Anyways, let's start by talking about the problem solver of this duo. As most older players know, Klee is a very outdated character with a clunky kit, one that has a lot of inherent problems with modern Genshin gameplay. She's slow, difficult to mobilize if you can't reliably use walk cancels, can't group enemies for her mini bombs, doesn't have a general best in slot artifact set, and is very squishy with no easy incentive to work around her squishiness, among a lot of other issues. So at a baseline, Klee has a lot of problems that no other character in the game can solve as many of as Kazuha can. In comparison to Kazuha's Animo counterparts, Venti does have great crowd control and Pyro shred, but his enemy displacement ruins some of Klee's team strategies with characters that are affected by the high displacement. Sucrose, when C6 and built as a burst spammer, can somewhat reliably emulate Kazuha's value, but not to the same extent that Kazuha himself can with Klee, and her own elemental mastery buffs, which account for a large portion of her kit's value, are useless to Klee in her strongest teams. And as poetic as it would be for Jean to be the ultimate Klee problem solver, she's generally more suited for survivability increases, as her own buffing potential for Klee is very limited and far less practical than Kazuha and even Sucrose and Venti. Now, none of these characters are bad pairs for Klee, they all have the potential to provide some form of value for her, but none of them provide as much value as practically as Kazuha does, which is why I would call him her ultimate problem solver. Some of Klee's biggest issues in regards to her popularity stem from the fact that she is extremely tedious to play and very difficult to build around and set up for. People like to play characters that can reliably and easily output large damage, and because of Klee's very weird, very outdated kit, she has a hard time doing so in easy and practical ways. Well, that was until Kazuha solidified one of her strongest teams to date, the Mono Pyro team. Mono Pyro is a team that uses Bennett and Xiangling as a core, generally with an Animo unit and then a flex spot, Klee being the flex spot and Kazuha being the Animo unit. There are variations of this team in which you replace Xiangling for Venti for a double Animo, double Pyro, but the most flexible iteration of the team is my aforementioned setup. Now, the reason most players consider Mono Pyro to be Klee's best team is because it actually boasts competitive damage output to that of reaction teams, and yet also allows much less restricting and mechanically intensive rotations. Without the need to focus so heavily on timing and rotations, you can theoretically just toss out lots of abilities and enemies and then swap to Klee in order to focus on her own abilities and cancel combos. It's kind of poetic in that way because by breaking the rules of common team building, Klee is able to play much more freely and by extension powerfully. Beyond that though, much of Klee's total damage comes from many aspects of her kit, not just one main focus, so placing her in a team of this nature will boost the entirety of her kit, allowing for, as I said, very high DPS potential. But the reason Kazuha makes this team what it is because of his wild flexibility and compatible kit. For example, if you were running Klee, Xiangling, and Bennett with Venti, number one, Venti's crowd control would take Xiangling's burst out of the equation for mobbed enemies, and Venti himself has auto-targeting issues and can't even pull Klee's mines, making him objectively not as suitable to single-handedly carry this team. If Sucrose took this place, however, her own auto-targeting issues as well as her somewhat average crowd control would prove to be inconsistent with the team, and beyond that, her elemental mastery bonuses means next to nothing in this team, so she'd feel out of place as well. So for starters, Kazuha does everything both of the aforementioned characters cannot do, reliably crowd control enemies and maintain a full synergy with all three characters, but he also provides a large pyro damage bonus and pyro resistance shred for the team as well, which in Klee's case significantly boosts her damage output, arguably even more so and more practically than reaction teams can for Klee. So why is that? Well, as I said, Klee's kit has lots of aspects to it that deal smaller instances of pyro damage, think death by 1,000 cuts. So the common misconception is that Klee was designed specifically to focus on high vape charged attacks like other pyro DPS units, which while not untrue is not true either, if that makes sense. If you play Klee inside of a team that focuses on vaping or melting her charged attack, you'll notice lots of times that without absurd hydro or cryo application, her smaller abilities and attack ticks will eat these vaporized multipliers before her charged attacks can. And even then her charge attacks only account for so much of her damage output. So successfully vaping all of her charge attacks with high hydro applications still requires you to focus on intensive rotations and energy management in most reaction teams. And that's on top of managing Klee's cancel combos, which for many players, myself included, feels tedious at best. Which is exactly why many players have found it much more enjoyable to slot Klee into the simplifying synergy of Mono Pyro, and more specifically Kazuha. Kazuha provides invaluable buffs to Klee's pyro damage specifically, which in large amounts proves to be much more practical than trying to rely on constantly vaping her pyro damage, because it's not just her charged attack that deals large damage from her kit, it's also her burst dealing a huge amount of overtime damage and her skill, which can deal large front-loaded or back-loaded damage. But he also has other smaller synergies with her kit, like his ability to pull her mines into enemies, which ends up dealing upwards of 419% skill damage at level 8 skilled talent or 472% skill damage at level 10. And for all of the remedies Kazuha provides to Klee's tedious kit, Mono Pyro, specifically with large attack buffs and pyro damage buffs from Bennett and Xiangling, allows Klee to fully utilize the buffs because she's given a good amount of on-field time where she can front-load lots of damage or steadily rotate in favor of longer drawn-out fights. The rotation strategy is entirely up to the player. I suppose it's also worth noting that while this team does have respectable AoE damage, it also deals considerable single target damage against large bosses as well. And the team itself, much thanks to Kazuha's flexibility, has a wide range of possible rotations for players to perform depending on the situation. Many teams, especially with Klee, require strict rotations so that she can fit herself onto the field for a suitable duration after setting up her reactions. But Mono Pyro, as I briefly mentioned earlier, doesn't have this issue, as virtually any half-planned rotation can get the job done nicely. Take for example this gameplay I had against Raiden, in which I opted for a more offensive rotation where I focused less on team energy circulation and more on front-loading as much damage as possible in the first rotation. In focusing on such an aggressive rotation, I was able to front-load a huge amount of Klee's damage with the Widzith, chunking about 75% of Raiden's health, which is no small feat. And that's just one of the many rotations you can come up with in Mono Pyro. Some cater more towards longer sustained fights where you circulate energy, which is great for Spiral Abyss multi-wave floors. Others just follow the generally aggressive front-loaded damage that I just showed. And there's actually another similarly enjoyable team involving Klee and Kazuha that, while not as practical as Mono Pyro, is still very strong and worth mentioning. That team being a reverse melt Rosaria team with Klee, Bennett, Rosaria, and Kazuha. And I say this because it actually acts somewhat similarly to Mono Pyro, because Klee herself isn't generally making use of the melt, but rather her high pyro damage with Kazuha and Bennett's buffs, whilst Rosaria's burst is simultaneously dealing a huge amount of melt damage from off the field. While the team itself is nowhere near as flexible as Mono Pyro in terms of units and rotations, its rotation is very simple and practical to pull off, and it provides huge damage in AoE situations while still proving respectable in single target situations as well. But I bring this up because once again, Kazuha plays a nearly irreplaceable role in this team with Klee, as he reliably crowd controls enemies without displacing them to the point that Rosaria's huge burst melts don't hit them. But he also provides a large AoE source of pyro application and pyro damage buffs for Klee herself to make use of whilst driving the team. In other words, the core synergy that Klee and Kazuha have, the one that I have discussed in this video, is applied to this team for huge and consistent damage, making it a reliable and fun team to work with if you wanted to throw Rosaria into the mix for huge AoE damage. Overall, Klee and Kazuha are definitely one of my weirder pairs for this series, firstly because Kazuha is already arguably a god duo for any elemental carry, but also because this pair focuses equally on the problem solving that Kazuha does for Klee's shortcomings rather than just the huge big PP damage that they can deal together, which is what many of my other god duo videos explain. And Kazuha's amazing synergy with Mono Pyro allows Klee access to an amazing team and very unlikely strategy that makes her, in my experience, much more enjoyable to play than she was when I last played her way back in 1.6. So, if this video helped you in any way or you enjoyed it, please leave a like and consider subscribing. I would be so grateful. Also consider joining my Discord server to stay up to date with my content, because I would love to see you around in my community. Alright, I'm gonna go mentally prepare for Sumeru. I'll see you later, guys. Bye.